want to welcome my guest today. Christopher is at Capital, which is a really interesting startup that he'll tell us a little bit more about. But he's, comes from a technical background, but he's going to talk a little bit about org structure and sort of how they put together their teams and talk about the sort of organizational ownership in their engineering organization. So really appreciate you making the time with us. And
thanks, Charles.
Yeah, I'll let you share your screen and get out of your way.
All right. Hi, everybody. Happy Tuesday. I hope everybody's looking forward to Thanksgiving that's coming up. I know I am. So let me just share my screen and present. Pull up. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yeah, looks great.
Great. All right. I see some yeses on the chat. So today I want to talk about extreme ownership in engineering, and I'll get into exactly what I mean here. But first, man, what a year it's been. It's if you're anything like me, I think we're all looking forward to 2021 and hopefully things stabilizing and a little bit less change would be good for a change. Look, things have changed very quickly this year. There's a really industry-wide reckoning about how should we build teams. Some of our biggest tech companies have declared long-term remote strategies. And here's kind of a graph about the percent housing inventory change over time. As you can see in San Francisco, which is our kind of largest tech center in the world, there's been rapid change in housing supplies, and this by definition means rapid change in where people are in working in these technology organizations. So, with all of this fast-moving change, I think that it's going to challenge all of us to be better leaders and also all better owners at our jobs. So let me get into what I mean. First, I want to start out by introducing our teachers for today. A lot of this is sort of spelled out in this book, Extreme Ownership. It was published in 2015. And I first want to start out by saying, most of us focus on building great technology and products in the world. And thank you to those who sacrificed so we can have this opportunity. I don't know if we'll send out the presentation after this, but here's a link with some of the great key points of the book. In short, there's really kind of 12 principles, and you have to take them all to really exhibit extreme ownership. And I won't really get into the nuts and bolts of what each of these mean. I would encourage everybody to get a copy of the book or read the summary that I've linked here. I really want to zoom in to one in particular that I think drives us more specifically to building better teams. And it's the second point on this list. No bad teams, only bad leaders. So I'll be revisiting this at the end, but I'll start off by saying it's a pretty bold statement. And it's also uniquely extreme ownership. And if we can sit with this as teams and organizations, I think we have a strong foundation to all perform at our very best. In fact, I'll just lead with it in the description. I talked about, what are the tools we can use in extreme ownership to build better teams. And I think this is sort of our most pointed tool that we can use. Let me unpack exactly what I mean, and I'll do this sort of over the next 15 minutes or so. So I'll be going through three things. I'll first give a little bit more of an introduction about me and how I came to deeply buy into this philosophy. We'll take kind of a brief history lesson next, and the reason for this is it's helpful to frame how we got here as software organizations, how we sort of work as teams today, what that was built upon, what kind of lessons we've learned over the past 100 years of change. And then the third section is I'll be putting it all together. How does EO, extreme ownership, fit into this, and why is it kind of unique to help us build and think about building better teams. So I'll first start off with a quick about me. I'm Chris, as Charles said. I'm co-founder and CTO at Capital. Our mission is to make capital access more fair, transparent, and equitable. We're ambitious. We're building for the long term. We're doing this by building Bloomberg 2.0 for the private markets. And we're building a team of extreme owners and deep technologists. And how I kind of came to this point in my career started kind of a long time ago. In fact, it was started when I was a freshman at Stanford and kind of caught the entrepreneurial bug. Didn't really know what that meant. I did know that I wanted to build businesses, and this online tutoring company actually wasn't the first business I started. It was actually a carbon credit and renewable energy certificate retailer. And if you know what that means, we should be instant friends. Send me a note. But so I went off and built an online tutoring company. This was right around the time when video in the browser was pretty good. And we paired that with an online whiteboard. So we did real-time collaborative tutoring sessions. And we used sort of alumni from high schools to set up their own tutoring networks back to the school. This led me to kind of unwittingly pretending like I'm in season 1 of Silicon Valley. And to this day, that show is HBO Silicon Valley. It's still hard for me to watch because it's so real. In fact, it's exactly like the show. But, quickly realized that we wasn't really building a great business. And really the only thing that matters most between the tutoring and students relationship is the relationship. And, alumni sales channels back to the high school didn't really scale well. So I ended up joining some friends in the proverbial garage as a founding engineer. And this is our garage. I'm not in the picture, but I am right outside of the frame. You can see my little stick figure here. I'm about right underneath here. And this is where we started, and we ended up building a product that kind of scaled around the world. The company was Class Dojo, and we were a small team. We were very tight-knit. We were moving very fast. And it was a real 6-year lesson for me on how high ownership and trust can help us build high-performing teams. When I think back on that experience, we were unknowingly practicing parts of extreme ownership. And I really experienced how incredibly powerful it is. And it helped us sort of grow to, this was a graphic we had and we made, and sort of have this usage around the world. And it was pretty incredible and high impact. So, I know we don't have a ton of time, so let me jump into the second part of this, which is a brief lesson. How did we, everyone here is agile. Everyone has worked, I assume, in technology organizations and have built software or interface with teams that are building software. And to answer this question, we kind of have to look back to the early 1900s. And it started with a movement called, Taylorism. And then I'll talk about each of these in turn. Then, fast forward about 40 years, we get the Toyota production system. And then fast forward to the early 2000s, we get the Agile Manifesto. And each of these taught us sort of a piece of the puzzle. And they each sort of build on each other. So let me get into what each of these movements taught us. So for each of these, I sort of pull out a quote that I think illustrates the essence of what we learned. And what Taylorism taught us was that, training and development of each individual is really important. And doing that helps us reach the fastest pace with the maximum efficiency. It was developed in a time where a lot of the work in the industrialization of the world was kind of in assembly lines, as you see in this picture. You had your manager here in the middle, and then you had sort of the workers, and the workers were responsible for producing a product as efficiently as possible and as fast as possible. So we learned something really important during Taylorism. We learned that we can actually take a pretty scientific approach to improving the efficiency of product creation. But there was one kind of big thing missing. And, under Taylorism, it tells us that workers are carefully managed and work is meticulously planned by managers. And there's a anonymous tech satirist, and it's questionable if it's satire, if it's real. It's kind of like The Onion. We don't know if it's satire or real. The lines are blurred. But his name was Archibald Putt, and he published kind of a book and proposed what he calls a law. And his law intuits that it's kind of a bad idea, I think, in technology organizations to let the managers meticulously plan every piece of work. What Putt Law says is technology is dominated by two types of people: those who understand what they do not manage, and those who manage what they do not understand. And there's a corollary to this, which is every technical hierarchy in time develops a competence inversion. We can kind of intuit this is true. I don't know how many of you all have, been coding a lot and then taken some time away from coding and done other things. Maybe you manage, maybe you took some time off and you get rusty. And it's not that you forgot how to code. It's just that without practicing it day to day, you become less sharp. So maybe in tech organizations, management isn't in the best position to find the best technical solutions to our business. So fast forward about 40, 50 years, sort of post World War II, we got the Toyota production system. I could spend a whole hour, or I could spend multiple hours just talking about this. I'm a huge fan. It's kind of what originated, when you hear lean. E.G. Toyota was, after World War II, kind of pioneered what it means to do this. And the key difference between Taylorism and the Toyota way is the Toyota way preaches that the worker is the most valuable resource, not just a pair of hands taking orders, but an analyst and problem solver. It gave us some pretty powerful ideas like one-piece flow. That teaches us that quality and lowest cost are not competing goals. They're actually, go hand in hand. They also taught us to give everyone the power to halt the assembly line when they notice an issue. So we talk about, what Toyota production system gave us is that worker empowerment is critical to achieving both the highest quality at the lowest cost. In fact, they're not competing ideas, they support each other. But building software is a little bit different than building cars. If I build a bad car today, I don't affect cars that were sold 10 years ago. And unfortunately, when we're building software, that's true. If I ship bad code today, I could break software that's been working for years. And it's sort of unique to this world of software that, I still think is pretty nascent in us understanding how to build quality into them. So then in the early 2000s, we had the Agile Manifesto. And this was pretty powerful because they framed, how should we think about this in terms of trade-offs? Individuals' interactions over processes and tools. And you can sort of read the manifesto. If you've never read it, you should read it. It's very short. It's about one paragraph. It's signed by, a bunch of people who were really thought leaders at the time. And what I really love about this framing is, values, you should always frame values in terms of trade-offs because it's not really a value if everyone would say it. So Agile, we've learned a ton. We've operationalized these goals and principles in a number of ways. We've gotten Scrum from it. We've gotten extreme programming. We've gotten, even more recently, Basecamp ShapeUp. And there's definitely not a one-size-fits-all approach to this. And that's kind of the point. So I want to put this all together very quickly and succinctly. So I don't know how many people have seen, there we go. I've seen this comic, it's hilarious. It's also kind of true. We have so the biggest tech organizations today have kind of developed these different social structures. You have Facebook, who early on was very flat. You had Apple, you had the essentially all-seeing eye of Steve Jobs, which had an incredible impact on how that organization developed. Google early on looked a lot like Facebook, and then they grew into this very, some hierarchy, but also a lot of cross-cutting responsibilities. Microsoft has actually had an incredible organizational transformation led by Satya Nadella, and you should actually read, he talks a lot about extreme ownership, and that his first, one of the first things he did as CEO was come in and kind of redo the culture and to try and create a culture of more collaboration. So while this was Microsoft under Bill Gates, the Microsoft under Satya Nadella is definitely under transformation. and their market cap is kind of benefited from it. And then Oracle, well, I mean, I don't know, their failed bid of TikTok, and maybe they should just really stick to their enterprise software. But the curious thing about all of these different structures is that you can probably talk to any of the engineers there in the teams, and they would all say we're agile. Somehow, agile would apply to Facebook as equally to Google. And it's because agile didn't really have a strong opinion on how the organization should operate together. It has principles, true. Extreme programming has a set of principles, but they're all a little bit more tactical in nature. And to really understand what's going on with these different org structures, I think we have to get a little bit more formal about how we talk about this. You can think of every organization as a cross between technical structure and social structure. In fact, every team falls somewhere in this 2x2. And the key point I want to make here is that there's no one size fits all, and there's different reasons for organizations to fall in different parts of this 2x2. The top left is good for environments that are certain, they're slower moving, the goals hardly change, and you really do want to really just ensure that things are done the same way every time, all the time. The bottom left is a good environment for if for whatever reason there's one or a very small group of people who are the only ones that have enough context to make good decisions. But the problem with the two quadrants here on the left is that there's high communication overhead. And by definition, that means there's low reactivity, and then there's high time decision-making. And I put a little kind of figure here that shows that, if you have your decision maker up here at the top and somebody has an idea, we incur a round trip time of who knows how long. It depends on the details of the organization. And that's fine. But, a lot of times, particularly in startups, and particularly when we're in exploration mode and trying to understand our customers and build new products and innovate, our most valuable resource is time. So anytime we have to go through this round trip or have to go through some sets of layers, it's high cost. So extreme ownership plays into this because it allows us to go from coercive environments into enabling environments. And the way it does this is it first and foremost challenges organizational leadership. It brings them into the conversation. And when we operate in environments where the greatest resource is time, we would be well served to be highly reactive. We'd be well served to collaborate a lot, because collaboration is where, driven by competing ideas, where we have a chance for a lot of what I call nonlinear innovation. And that's really what matters. It's these 10 and 100x innovations that really drive progress. And even more importantly, it creates environments of high trust. And so it really negates the need of in-person micromanagement. And that is, for all of us, is, more fulfilling environments to work in. So we've built kind of step by step in these organizations and tailors, and we learned that, hey, there's better ways to do things. The Toyota production system told us, hey, let's involve everybody in problem solving. And then Agile gave us some specific tactics and frameworks around how to walk and how to create software teams. And what extreme ownership lets us do is it lets us specifically bring leadership into the discussion. It specifically challenges all of us to be owners. So here's a quote in extreme ownership is, "There are no bad units, only bad officers." This captures the essence of what extreme ownership is all about. It's a difficult and humbling concept for any leader to accept, but it is an essential mindset to building a high-performing team. And if we couple these things together and we demand leadership take ownership, and we demand that all of us start thinking as owners, we can start to craft values that let us work better together. Here's some values we have at Capital, which is candor over harmony. And this is really enabled by checking your ego at the door. Trust is greater than control. This is really enabled where in extreme ownership, we talk about decentralized command. Where result is greater than effort, where each one of us should own everything in your world. And as a software engineer, that can be challenging. Software is vast. If you build any non-trivial product, there is a lot to know. But you can think about owning everything within your interface boundaries. What happens when your system interacts at the boundaries? And everything within that, you should think about taking full ownership on. And there's another value that we kind of got from Toyota Production System, which is continuous improvement is greater than continuous production. And underneath all these, I kind of talk a little bit about how we operationalize that. But I want to come full circle again. No bad teams, only bad leaders. In the description, I talk about how can we use this as a tool to build more fulfilling organizations. And I think we should start asking ourselves in interviews of our current bosses, of any of our future bosses that we might interview with in teams. Not just how much do you adhere to Agile, but how much do you adhere to extreme ownership? How receptive do you think some of the teammates you've worked with or even your bosses would be to a statement like this? It's pretty divisive. And it's definitely challenging. So I would encourage us, as much as we focus on the technical details, as much as we focus on the methodologies that we follow, we should also focus on how do we think about exhibiting extreme ownership in our organizations. But you can't just pick and choose. And that's the point of this. As much as leadership is challenged to take ownership, what gives them leaders the space to create an organization that has a lot of latitude is owning everything in their world. It's being sure you check your ego at the door. We keep it simple and demand simplicity and clarity of goals. We need a plan, and we need to be decisive. So I encourage everybody to read the book. I think that it gives us a unique tool that neither Lean nor Agile gives us. And I think on that foundation, I think we're kind of poised to build better teams moving forward. And if the past 10 months has been any indication on the amount of change that's going to happen in the next 10 months, I think that we're going to need all the tools we can to build as strong and great organizations possible. So that's it. Went pretty quickly through it all. If any of this resonates with you, I know we have a quick Q&A right after this, or you'd like to talk more about it or have other thoughts, I'm Chris. I put my email address here. It's chris@captech.io. Feel free to email me. And with that,
Cool.
we included a quick, long lesson. Definitely did not do any one part of them justice. If you're curious about any one of these movements, drop me a note, Google it. A lot to learn. It's all very fascinating.
So I have a few questions, especially as it pertains to early stage and smaller teams. I think one of the keys to empowering people to be leaders is information, is making sure everyone's on the same page. Good information makes better decisions, right? So if you're making decisions from a leadership perspective, you want to be as informed as possible. It reminds me a little bit of, it's not a manifesto, it's kind of a pledge that X.AI has with its employees. And they talk about, it's sort of the agreement you have to the rest of the organization. So it's not like your employee agreement. It's things like, the one that stood out to me for this is I'm comfortable operating in the dark, which is sort of, if you're hiring somebody for a startup, maybe coming from a stagnant sort of bigger corporate place, that's one thing you want to make sure is that people are operating well in information deficient environments. How do you balance the giving somebody ownership and agency in a group where there's sometimes just like, for example, as you're pre-launch, or you don't have a ton of users yet or whatever, is that at some extent you don't actually have enough information to make a great decision. And I think some organizations would say, hey, you know what? I'm the founder. I have a hunch. It's my hunch that got backed by the VCs to sort of move forward. So this is where we're going. And it's going to be hard for people to make independent decisions when you don't have enough information. And so, I mean, your team's, how big is your team?
We're 40 all in. Engineering and product is about 26.
Right. So sort of mid-ish sized team, small in the grand scheme of things, but for a startup, kind of mid-sized. How do you balance the operating in the dark nature of startups with that extreme ownership perspective?
That's a great question. And it's an art. And I think we're constantly learning how to do it. But if you go back to extreme ownership, one of the things they talk a lot about is clarity. They talk a lot about clarity of goals. So as a leader, what I spend a lot of my time in trying to do is provide better clarity for the team on what the goals are. So sometimes the goals aren't results. So it doesn't have to be take over the world tomorrow. It's not, achieve the growth. So a lot of times, Keith Raboy talks a lot about this. He talks a lot about, a lot of times you want to look at the inputs. You don't necessarily want to frame goals as results. You want to frame, are we learning? How fast are we learning? How quickly are we learning? And we're not kind of left alone here. One of the things that we do at Capital is our feature teams follow Basecamp Shape Up. And Basecamp Shape Up, there is no roadmaps. It's kind of baked into the philosophy. So you can support this through the methodologies you choose, like Basecamp Shape Up. Our core teams actually operate more on a Kanban system, and I think that's what's working right now. But it goes back to communication and clarity of goals. What parts of the system you're looking at? Are you looking at inputs or outputs? And then what methodologies do you pair for your teams? So if you roll all that up, you strive for clarity. And what extreme ownership allows us to do, and also gives employees space to do, is to demand clarity. If one of the leaders isn't giving clarity, demand it. Don't do anything unless there's clarity. And
Gotcha.
that's what I think is the enabling dynamic for this, and why extreme ownership is so powerful, because it's not just top down anymore. It's also, we got to focus on the feedback, and we got to have a cohesive set of principles that we organize that around.
Gotcha. In your bad leaders quote, when you think about hiring leaders, do you think that, what are some of the qualities? I guess it's sort of are leaders born or leaders developed kind of thing, where do you think that in your organization, for example, do you strive to create an organization at which any adequately intelligent and highly motivated person can be a leader? Or do you take the position that there are some naturally good leaders or people who have gotten there through hard work, and we're going to hire them, and that frankly there are good leaders and bad leaders, and we're trying to find them, and the organizational structure matters less?
I think there's good habits and bad habits, not necessarily good leaders and bad leaders. I think that leadership, if you think about leadership, I think a lot of it can be taught. Now, there are certain tendencies, like somebody could naturally be a better communicator than somebody else, but as you develop into your leader, there's no one size fits all. You don't have to be extroverted leader. In fact, we have a lot of examples of more introverted leaders who have developed great communication styles. And a lot of what we do at Capital is try and promote teaching of these skills. So we have like a bi-weekly managers book club. And if you think about the core set of what management is, it's just a skill. It's just a skill like programming is a skill. And you can cultivate getting better at that skill. And so I always hope to create an environment we strive to create an environment that cultivates that, identifies it. And yeah, if you want to step into a leadership position and it's your first time, Ray Dalio talks a lot about task relevant maturity. You're gonna have low task relevant maturity. You're gonna have to learn a lot very quickly, and it's gonna be challenging. But that's what's fulfilling about it. And that's what's fulfilling about extreme ownership. and about startups is it pushes you to grow, and you kind of achieve more than you thought was possible.
It's interesting. Brooklyn Bridge Ventures is a 2-person organization, and we were actually just having a conversation about clarity and information the other day, where there was an instance where I was suggesting that I wanted to make sort of less decisions about some things, but the thing I wasn't providing was clarity about what's important. It's very easy to go off and tell someone like, oh, you should do what you think is right. But in the absence of goals, inputs, and all of that other stuff, like it's very hard for anybody else to make a decision if they really don't understand, like, implement this your own way, but I'm not going to tell you what the end goal is supposed to be.
And you can always get better at this. And in fact, as the complexity of what you're building as a business increases, the importance of doing this well also increases almost non-linearly. And that's why striving for that early on is so important. Sometimes we know what to do, sometimes we don't, but we all need to be striving toward that goal of clarity.
What are some of the day-to-day tactical whether it's like stand-ups or communication methodologies or tools or whatever, like if I were to sort of join Capital on a day-to-day basis, what are some of the ways in which I experience the extreme ownership things? Like, what would I notice about how people are interacting, or what I'm getting from my, the leader in my group or whatever on a tactical basis?
Yeah, so a couple things. I mean, I think we're still small enough so everyone has a direct connection to, the co-founders.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing, and I always hope to keep that channel open. Second thing is and along with sort of the remote environment, is we write a lot. And anybody can write a proposal on anything. We promote that. We actually just adopted Notion. It's working pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Notion's a pretty good tool. I think there are things that could be done, but I care most about cultivating competing
Where do
ideas.
those proposals go? Just out of curiosity. Like, I've joined, I'm 2 days into the organization. Where do I put a proposal?
Your team gets a section. It's very clearly marked. There's an introduction page, tells you all the procedures of that team. Mm-hmm. Underneath there is embedded all of the design documents and discussions happening. So you can go there, create one, and circulate it. Sort of just I encourage that. I even say if you don't do some of the work because you spend your time making a design document and trying to build a better system, I actively encourage that. And everyone should be able to do that. And what I care about is you can get into these situations where there's competing ideas. And one of the things that I care a lot about is disagree and commit. Let's debate fiercely the things that matter. Let's bring those proposals to the table. Let's make a decision, and let's disagree and commit. And that's how we make progress. And that's how we all get better. Because, I truly think that if you're building complex businesses, complex products, no one person is going to have the golden idea. You need competition. In fact, there's books about how Apple actually internalizes internal competing divisions to create the best possible and global solution. So I think there's a lot more we can still learn about this.
And I think when you were talking about writing those proposals, because Brian just asked, you were talking about doing that on Notion?
Yeah, we're using we started with Google Docs. We're using Notion today. I think I don't think the jury has decided on how to best do this yet. I think that organizations have different ways of doing this. And we lost a lot when we kind of went more remote rather than not, because you lost the whiteboard and being in the same room. So we're all trying to figure out how to get that back.
Gotcha. Cool. Before I have another question, but I just want to open it up for if anybody from the group has a question that they want to get in, you could use either the ask a question thing or just throw it in the chat. Here's a question. Your first slide mentioned some of the big companies going into this long-term remote strategies. They were looking for a link to if you had a link to that declaration.
Yeah. So do you send an email out after? I can sort of.
We can. Yeah, you can send it to Lauren. We'll send it.
All right. Yeah, that was specifically from an article. It was one of the San Francisco newspapers. I believe it was SF Gate back in July. And it was talking about the exodus from San Francisco, and there's a lot of anecdata about it. And so that was the first. Let's try and put some numbers to it.
Gotcha. So along those lines, I'll ask a remote work question. Are there tools, communication tools, whether for whiteboarding or continuous communication or anything else that you have looked into or tried, or you feel like there's just a need and you haven't found it yet for something you want to do as a remote team that you were doing before that you haven't quite solved yet?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've been experimenting a lot. So we started off on Slack, then we tried Twist because we were like, Twist gives us more long form communication. Turned out that it didn't work too well for us, so we ended up adopting Discord. So people like Discord, like that's for gamers. But what was a really compelling feature for Discord is that they had always persistent voice channels, and you can create them, and so you can kind of simulate sitting at the table and kind of all talking together. So today we're on Discord. Mm-hmm. I think we're still seeing,
Is that open and live all the time, or just for like meetings and stuff?
No, it's open live all the time, and that's because most of our team is still not asynchronous remote. Although I'm open to that. There's a difference here. So we're all working at the same time. So we do have Discord, and the teams end up collaborating within themselves, like either Discord or Google Hangouts. But I think there's still ways we can learn to get better here. I mean, I wish it's not one for one like all in the office, and I don't know how realistic it is to think that. I mean, it's not realistic at Capital at all. We have office pod in New York City, and we have a pod in Mexico City. We're kind of forever not all going to be in the same place already, and I think that trend is just going to continue everywhere for every company, started or not. So
Gotcha.
We're kind of all in this together, figuring it out.
Cool. So Blaine asked a great question, and we'll finish off with this one. How do you encourage ownership for an individual contributor? And so, they may propose something, but obviously any new feature, any new product has a process, right? From design docs and specs to, implementation to deployment to bug fixing or whatever. Does that person essentially become the mini product manager of that thing all the way through, or does it, how does an individual contributor own something end to end?
Yeah, this is a really great question, and I probably won't be able to do the answer justice, but I'll try to do it very quickly. So we can start by thinking about, and I don't know if you've ever been asked this in interviews, thinking about the definition of done. So, you can think about, there's a starting point for individual contributors, and what Extreme Ownership challenges to do is to just gradually grow in ownership to eventually own our whole world. It doesn't tell us what the whole world is, but it gives us ideas of, wow, there's a growth trajectory here. So I talk about the definition of done. As an individual contributor, how often is your organization enabling you to be sure that the thing you're shipping is working in production? Like, the feature's not done if you just commit it and send it off to Git and kind of throw it over the wall. So you first can think about, oh man, maybe I can expand. Is it possible for me to monitor how the code I wrote is actually doing in production and own quality there? And then you talk a lot about the front end of that, which is how far does the organization let you start designing features? And let's think about a deep core team. Like, let's say you have something, let's talk about data platform or something, or you're making a data pipeline. How much of it is the developer's responsibility and ownership to build a good system? I would say it's absolutely everybody's responsibility to build a good system, but the unit of ownership is the team. And so I think that if the teams are being led by good leaders, they constantly promote each of the individual contributors growing to the point where, you're basically at your limit. And that's fulfilling because you're growing and you're finding out where your limits are. And it lets you sort of As long as you have enough debate and you have a lot of task relevant maturity guiding this, like what I'm not saying is, you're doing it for the first time and you make a novice mistake. It's providing support for that, but giving the opportunity. So
gotcha. So you're not necessarily saying take your world-class front-end developer and suddenly take up half their time actually doing QA, but certainly give them visibility into the QA process to be able to say, hey, it looks like this thing that I built isn't working in this instances. Let me feel a certain sense of responsibility to sort of look at the bug reports, look at what the QA team might be doing, and then go back and maybe try and fix it myself just before somebody comes back to me and says it's broken. So I'm reaching in, but I'm not suddenly becoming a QA engineer. And my
100%. And think about what extreme ownership enables with that mindset. It started the conversation about what would it look like if we owned QA? How can we make QA better? Is there a way that QA is a separate thing, shouldn't be a separate thing? Is there a better way to do it? And it starts you asking those questions, and those questions only come and are only asked if the people closest to the work are kind of taking ownership and enabled to start here and expand.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, listen, thanks so much for spending time with us. I really appreciate all your insight and effort, and you've given us a ton to think about. So thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Of course, and thanks everybody for listening. And if you want to discuss anything more, feel free to reach out. I don't know if you'll circulate the deck or not, or links, but
yeah, we could definitely do that. All right, thanks. Have a good day.
All right.